The steel cuff bit savagely into Nia Harlow's wrist. The officer's knee drove into her back with brutal force, grinding her cheek against the filthy floor of the airport terminal. Her pristine white silk blouse, a symbol of her new beginning, was now stained and twisted. "You match the description, sweetheart," Officer Brennan sneered, his voice dripping with venom. A wanted woman. She had no idea that the woman he had pinned to the ground was no ordinary citizen. She was the new state attorney general, and her career had just begun to unravel. Before we see what happens next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss how everything unfolds. The recycled air of the jet bridge still carried the taste of freedom, a faint metallic scent of jet fuel mixed with the promise of a fresh start. Nia Harlow walked with a determination she had honed over a decade, navigating courtrooms and legislative halls. At 36, she possessed a formidable intellect and a presence that captivated without a single word. Her 5'10" frame was clad in a tailored black pantsuit, its severity softened by an immaculate white silk blouse. The fabric felt soft against her skin, a small luxury she had allowed herself for the occasion. This was her first day, the start of her term as the youngest state attorney general in recent memory. She smoothed the blouse, feeling the way her full bust pressed against the delicate silk, a physical reality she had long ago learned that others would try to use to define her. She would not allow it. As she stepped from the carpeted jet bridge onto the polished terminal floor, a wave of brilliant late-afternoon sunlight streamed through the vast windows, dazzling her for a moment. This was it, her new city, her new challenge. A genuine soft smile touched her lips as she adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase on her shoulder. Inside rested a copy of the speech she would deliver at her swearing-in ceremony, a speech filled with promises of reform, justice, and accountability. The irony of those words would soon be etched permanently into her memory. She scanned the sparse crowd of deplaning passengers. None paid her any attention. They were weary travelers, focused on collecting luggage and making connections. Then she saw him. He stood just beyond the gate agent's counter, a statue of unyielding authority. An airport police officer in uniform. He was a burly man with a thick neck and broad chest, his ruddy complexion speaking of high blood pressure and a short temper. His badge read Brennan. His small, hard eyes, like chips of granite, were fixed on her alone. Not on the crowd, not on the other passengers filing past, only on her. An instinct sharpened by years as a black woman in America and refined by her profession sent a low hum of warning through her veins. She had seen that look before. It was an appraisal that had nothing to do with security and everything to do with prejudice. It was the gaze of a man who had already judged and condemned her in his mind. She kept her chin level, her expression neutral, remembering the countless conversations with her father, a retired judge. Never show them fear, Nia. Never give them an excuse. Be smarter, calmer, and better prepared. She intended to walk past him, as if he were merely part of the terminal's architecture. But he shifted with a deliberate, almost theatrical movement, and blocked her path. His hand rested naturally on the butt of his holstered service weapon. "Ma'am," he said, a single word that became an impassable barrier. His tone was flat, stripped of the respect the address should have carried. "I need to see your identification." Nia stopped about 2 feet from him. She could smell the stale coffee on his breath. She offered a polite, professional smile that never reached her eyes. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" She began to shift her carry-on bag, intending to retrieve her wallet. It was a simple, non-threatening motion she had made countless times. But Brennan narrowed his eyes and tensed, as if facing a cornered animal. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the terminal's bustle. The few remaining passengers nearby slowed their steps, curiosity overtaking them. Nia froze, her hand suspended in midair. The smile vanished from her face, replaced by a cold, impenetrable mask. "Officer," she said, dropping her voice to the calm, measured tone she used in interrogations. "I was simply reaching for my identification, as you requested." Brennan took another step closer, invading her personal space, a classic intimidation tactic. "We received a call," he said, his gaze raking over her in a humiliating appraisal, lingering on the curve of her chest against the silk blouse. "There's a report of a woman matching your description, wanted for armed robbery. Apparently, you made someone nervous on the plane. Just a short while earlier, that same silk blouse had felt like armor." Seated in first class, a glass of sparkling water sweating onto the coaster beside her, Nia had felt a deep satisfaction. She gazed out the small, double-paned window at the mosaic of greens and browns far below, a landscape of possibilities. The flight was more than a journey. It was the triumphant final stage of a path that had begun in a small, crowded law school library years before. She had outworked, outstudied, and outargued everyone who had ever underestimated her. She thought of her mentor, the retired state attorney general Arthur Ellison, a man who had looked past her race and gender and recognized in her a fierce, unyielding advocate for justice. "You have fire in your heart, Nia," he had told her when he announced his support for her as his successor. "But you also have ice in your veins. It's a rare combination. You're going to need it." She had spent the flight reviewing her notes, not for her speech, but for the cases that would land on her desk the moment she was sworn in. A complex fraud case, a string of gang-related homicides, and a pile of police misconduct complaints that Arthur had warned her were a political minefield. She did not feel intimidated. She was energized. That was why she had become a lawyer, not for money or prestige, but from the conviction that the law, properly applied, could be a shield for the vulnerable, not merely a sword for the powerful. She remembered the case that had marked her, a client who could not pay her fees, a young mother victimized by an overzealous prosecutor and an indifferent public defender. Nia had worked tirelessly to uncover procedural errors and hidden evidence, ultimately securing the conviction's overturn. Watching that mother reunited with her child had been a far more rewarding victory than any corporate bonus. Her success had not come without struggle. Long nights, sacrificed relationships, and the constant pressure of having to work twice as hard to get half as far. She was a black woman in a world dominated by white men. She had endured subtle and not so subtle dismissals throughout her career. The opposing counsel who called her feisty, the judge who mistook her for the court reporter, the colleagues who whispered that her rapid rise was due to affirmative action rather than her own merit. She had absorbed it all, channeling the frustration not into bitterness, but into a stronger, more resilient determination. She had learned to navigate their world, to speak their language, to beat them on their own turf, without ever losing sight of who she was or where she came from. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing the beginning of the descent. Nia put away her files, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and nerves. She pulled out a small compact and checked her reflection. Her makeup remained flawless. Her dark hair was gathered in an elegant bun. She was perfect. She was the right person. As the plane banked, the city skyline came into view. A cluster of glass and steel towers gleamed under the afternoon sun. In one of those buildings sat her new office, an office with a view, an office with power. Power she intended to use to hold accountable those who abused their authority, those who judged others by the color of their skin. When the wheels touched down with a gentle jolt, she closed her eyes for a moment, offering a silent prayer of gratitude and promising herself she would not fail. She would make a difference. She gathered her briefcase and purse, the silk of her blouse whispering softly, and prepared to step into her future. A future that, in that very instant, was colliding with that of a man whose worldview was built on the prejudices she had sworn to dismantle. A collision that would prove far more violent and consequential than she could ever have imagined. Back in the terminal, the tension was palpable in the air, now focused on the epicenter of the entire gate area. The murmur of the curious had become a low, critical hum. "Armed robbery," Nia repeated, a dangerous calm in her voice. She let a moment of silence stretch, a courtroom tactic, to let the absurdity of the accusation sink in. "Officer, with all due respect, you have me confused with someone else. I am not a wanted woman. I am a state official on official business." She chose her words with surgical precision. State official. Official business. They were warning flares, signals that he was treading on dangerous ground. But Officer Brennan saw no warning flares. He saw a challenge to his authority. Her composure, her eloquence, her expensive suit. Everything seemed to feed his suspicion rather than dispel it. In his world, a black woman who looked and spoke as she did was an anomaly, and anomalies were threats. "State official," he mocked with a malicious smile. "So you're new. What are you, the transit office director?" His gaze dropped again to her chest, and he added, "Or maybe you're in charge of international relations." The lewd insinuation was as clear as it was repulsive. Nia clenched her jaw, but her expression remained impassive, projecting a distant professionalism. It was a test. He was trying to provoke her, to force an emotional reaction he could then label as aggression or resistance. She would not give him that satisfaction. "I am the new state attorney general," she said, her voice cold and hard as marble. She saw a flicker in his eyes, not of belief, but perhaps a moment of hesitation. It vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by even greater contempt. "The state attorney general," he let out a short, harsh laugh. "Ma'am, I already know the state attorney general. He's a 65-year-old white man named Arthur Ellison. So stop the nonsense." "Arthur Ellison retired recently," Nia stated without the slightest defensive edge. "I am his successor. My name is Nia Harlow. Now, if you will allow me to retrieve my identification, we can clear this up." She again made a slow, deliberate movement toward her bag. This time, Brennan's hand shot out, not to grab her, but to strike her briefcase, stopping the motion. The sound shattered the tense quiet. "I told you to stay still," he barked, his face inches from hers. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Walking in here with your fancy clothes and your fancy words, thinking you can talk your way out of this." "There is nothing I need to talk my way out of, officer," Nia said firmly. She refused to look away. She could see the swollen veins in his eyes, the beads of sweat on his forehead. He was losing control, and he knew it, and that made him more dangerous. "You are detaining me without cause. You are refusing to allow me to verify my identity. You are making a serious professional error." Every word was true. Every statement another brick in the legal wall she was building around this encounter. She was not merely a victim. She was an attorney general, and her mind was already documenting everything. The place, the witnesses, his exact words, his escalating aggression. The mention of an error was the final straw. His face contorted with rage. To him, it was the ultimate insult. This woman, the black woman he had already judged a criminal, was standing there, lecturing him on procedure. She was telling him he was wrong. "I'll show you who's wrong," he growled in a low, threatening voice. He reached for his handcuffs. "You're not going anywhere. You match the description, and that's all I need. Now turn around and put your hands behind your back." This was the point of no return. Nia stood firm. "I will not. You have no legal basis for this, and I will not comply with an unlawful order." It was a calculated risk, a final attempt to appeal to the law she had sworn to uphold. It backfired spectacularly. To Officer Brennan, her defiance was not a legal argument. It was a declaration of war. The world tilted. One moment, Nia stood firm, a pillar of legal defiance. The next, Brennan's hand clamped hard on her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. He spun her roughly, sending a sharp pain through her shoulder. The gasp of the onlookers was a distant, irrelevant sound. Her briefcase crashed to the floor, spilling papers across the polished surface, fragments of the speech on justice she was meant to deliver. Before she could process the initial assault, he seized the back of her neck with his other hand and slammed her to the ground. Her body, graceful and composed moments before, became a clumsy projectile of his fury. The impact was brutal. Her knees hit the hard terminal floor first. A wave of pain shot through her legs, followed by her chest and face. He drove his full weight onto her, and the air left her lungs in a choked gasp. Her cheek scraped against the floor, its surface rough with the grime of thousands of hurried footsteps. The once immaculate white silk of her blouse could not compete with the filthy terminal floor. She felt the dirt embedding itself into the delicate fabric, a physical manifestation of her humiliation. A sharp, metallic taste filled her mouth. She had bitten her lip in that dizzying second. All she could register was the piercing pain in her knees, the throb in her cheek, and the suffocating pressure of Brennan's knee driving into her lower back. He had her pinned like an animal, a trophy. "Hands behind your back," he roared in a triumphant, savage voice right beside her ear. He wrenched her right arm backward at an unnatural angle, and she let out a sharp, involuntary cry of pain that she immediately regretted. He was enjoying this. The power, the control, the ability to break the woman who had dared to challenge him. There was a brief pause before the cold, unyielding steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around her wrist, biting into the skin with deliberate force. He repeated the process with her left arm, yanking it so hard she felt a crack in her shoulder. The click of the second cuff locking was a definitive sound, a sound of absolute degradation. There she lay, handcuffed on the floor of a public airport, surrounded by strangers. Her tailored suit was disheveled, her blouse, stained, her face pressed to the dirt. Through the haze of pain and shock, her prosecutor's mind continued to function. A frantic metronome ran through the list of violations: unlawful detention, assault, battery, excessive force, violation of civil rights. Each was another nail in Brennan's coffin. But that was an abstract thought. The reality was the cold metal on her wrists, the crushing weight on her back, and the searing shame that threatened to consume her. "You match the description, sweetheart," Brennan said with contempt, his voice low and venomous, meant only for her ears. A wanted woman. He hauled her up by the chain of the handcuffs, a movement designed to inflict maximum pain and throw her off balance. She staggered to her feet, her vision blurring for a moment. Her hair, once gathered in a perfect bun, had come loose, strands falling across her face. Her cheek was already beginning to swell, and she could feel a trickle of blood from her split lip. She looked him in the eyes. Her eyes, though filled with pain, held no fear, only a cold, burning fire. A promise. He did not see it. He saw only what he wanted to see. A black woman he had successfully subdued. He had no idea of the reality. He had just assaulted the most powerful law enforcement official in the state. He had declared war on the system she represented, and his opponent was a master of that system. The battle had only just begun, and he had already let. The terminal, which had been a place of anonymous transit, transformed into an arena. Every eye was on her. Officer Brennan, chest puffed out, began leading her away from the gate. His hand clamped firmly on her bicep. It was not a walk. It was a parade. His victory lap. Nia felt the burn of hundreds of stares. She saw the mixture of surprise, pity, and a chilling morbid curiosity on the faces in the crowd. Cell phones were out. Small black rectangles lit the space, recording her humiliation for a global audience. The flashes felt like tiny explosions before her eyes. In a matter of minutes, her identity had been stripped away. She was no longer Nia Harlow, State Attorney General. She was a spectacle, a handcuffed black woman, a real-life episode of a police drama for their entertainment. She forced herself to walk with her head held high. It was an act of pure will. Everything in her wanted to shrink, to hide her face, to become invisible. But her father's voice echoed in her mind. Dignity, Nia. It's the one thing they cannot take from you unless you hand it over. So she straightened her back, despite the pain in her shoulder and the throb in her knees. She focused on a point in the distance, looking through the crowd, not at them. She would not let them see her break. She would not give Brennan the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Her mind, a fortress of legal precedents and strategic thinking, became her sanctuary. She cataloged the faces of those filming, potential witnesses. She noted the locations of the overhead surveillance cameras, irrefutable evidence. She mentally replayed every word Brennan had spoken, his testimony. She was no longer merely the victim of the assault. She was the chief architect of the case against him. They passed a newsstand, and for a surreal moment, she saw her own face reflected on the cover of a local magazine. It was a feature on her appointment titled "A New Face for Justice." The woman on the cover smiled, confident and serene. The woman being paraded in handcuffs was her grim, battered reflection. The dichotomy was a low blow. The system she had just been appointed to lead was failing her in that very moment, in the most raw way possible. Brennan seemed to notice her gaze. "Well, look at that. A real celebrity," he remarked sarcastically to his partner, a younger officer who had appeared to escort them. The partner, whose badge read Reeves, had the decency to look uncomfortable, avoiding Nia's eyes. He was a follower, not a leader, but his silence was complicity. The walk seemed endless. They passed a food court, where people paused with forks halfway to their mouths. They passed a play area where a small child pointed at her. His mother quickly lowered his hand and steered him away. Each step was a new wave of vicarious shame. Her silk blouse, which had once felt like a second skin, now seemed a torn and stained costume. The pain from the overly tight cuffs was a constant, sharp reminder of her powerlessness, or rather, her temporary powerlessness. It was a crucial distinction she clung to. This was a moment, not an eternity. An anomaly, not her identity. Finally, they reached a door marked Airport Security, authorized personnel only. Brennan swiped an access card and shoved her into a sterile, windowless hallway. The sudden silence after the terminal's bustle was disorienting. The door closed behind them, silencing the prying eyes and malicious murmurs. The public humiliation was over, but the next phase of the nightmare was only beginning. In the cold, impersonal corridor, under the hum of fluorescent lights, she was no longer a public spectacle. She was a prisoner alone with her captors. Brennan pushed her toward another door. "In here," he growled. "Time to find out who you really are." He still had no idea. The magnitude of his ignorance was almost impressive. He believed the interrogation was about to begin. In reality, it was. But he was the one about to be interrogated. The room was small, gray, and smelled of disinfectant and a faint despair. A metal table was bolted to the floor, surrounded by 3 equally uncomfortable plastic chairs. There were no windows. A single camera was mounted in the upper corner of the room, its small red light glowing. Evidence. Brennan shoved her roughly into one of the chairs, jamming the edge of the table into her thigh. He left her handcuffed. The chain rattled against the metal table as she shifted, searching for a less painful position. Officer Reeves stood awkwardly by the door, a silent, uneasy sentinel. Brennan, by contrast, seemed in his element. He pulled out the chair opposite, turned it around, and sat straddling it, arms crossed over the back. It was a posture he had probably seen in a movie, an attitude meant to be both intimidating and casual. "All right," Brennan began with feigned patience. "Let's try this again. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." The hard way involves a holding cell and a very unpleasant strip search. The easy way is you stop pretending and tell me your name. Nia looked at him with an inscrutable expression. The fire burning inside her was a white, controlled flame. She let the silence stretch, a tactic to unnerve him. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear and steady, with no trace of the tremor of fear or anger he so clearly expected. "I have already told you my name. My name is Nia Harlow, and I have also told you my position. I am now officially informing you, Officer Brennan, that you have unlawfully detained and assaulted a state official. Specifically, you have assaulted the state attorney general." She watched him closely as she spoke, gauging his reaction. She saw the flash of irritation, the way his jaw tightened. He still did not believe her. He could not. His entire worldview, his sense of authority and judgment, depended on her being a liar. To admit she was telling the truth would mean admitting he had just made a catastrophic error that could destroy his career and change his life. "The Attorney General," he repeated, shaking his head with a condescending chuckle. He glanced at his partner. "Get a load of this, Reeves. She's sticking to her story. You have to give her credit for consistency." Reeves shrugged weakly, non-committal. He clearly wanted to be anywhere else. Brennan turned back to Nia, the smile fading. "Look, sweetheart, I don't know what kind of game you're playing. Maybe you're on something. Maybe you're just crazy. But your fantasy is over. We put out a description. The woman we're looking for is black, tall, well-dressed, and used her looks to get close to a jewelry store manager before pulling a gun." He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Sound familiar? A pretty girl like you? People would trust you until you showed your true face." The profiling was so blatant, so textbook, it was almost ridiculous. He had taken a vague description and fitted it to his prejudice. A black woman who was attractive and well-dressed could not possibly be an attorney general. She had to be a criminal using sexual bait. Nia did not even blink. "You used a description, but did you search my name? Did you bother to verify my identity before throwing me to the ground?" "Don't need to," Brennan shot back, growing more frustrated. "We have probable cause. You matched the description. You acted suspicious." "How did I act suspicious?" Nia interrupted, her voice cutting like a scalpel. "By getting off the plane? By remaining calm when you approached me? By telling you the truth?" Her questions were a rapid-fire assault of logic, each one dismantling his flimsy justification. He was lost, falling back on bluster and intimidation because he had no legal foundation. "You were disrespecting me," he finally exploded, slamming his hand on the table. The sharp crack echoed in the small room. "Lying to a police officer, making up some wild story about being the Attorney General. That's resisting authority in my book." "It is not," Nia replied coldly, "and I have not lied about anything. My identification is in my bag. My credentials from the State Department of Justice are in my briefcase. All you have to do is look." She paused, then delivered the final devastating blow. "Or are you afraid of what you'll find?" The accusation hung in the air. "You're afraid." It was a direct challenge, not to his authority, but to his courage. For a man like Brennan, it was an even greater insult. His face flushed even redder. and for a moment Naya thought he might strike her again. Instead, he let out a harsh, grating laugh, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "Afraid?" he scoffed. "I'm not afraid of anything, least of all a lying, stuck-up punk like you." He began pacing the small room, his heavy boots echoing on the linoleum. It was the movement of a caged animal, agitated and cornered. "You want to see your ID? Fine. Reeves, go get her stuff. Let's see what kind of fake Attorney General ID she cooked up." Officer Reeves looked relieved to have a reason to leave the stifling tension of the room. He slipped out, and the door closed behind him. Brennan stopped pacing and leaned against the far wall, arms crossed over his chest. He looked at her triumphantly. "This is your last chance. Tell me the truth right now, and maybe, just maybe, I'll talk to the district attorney and see if I can cut a deal. If you keep up this stupid charade, you'll feel the full weight of the law. Assaulting an officer, resisting arrest, impersonating a public official. You'll be an old woman by the time you get out of prison." Nia simply looked at. Her silence was a more powerful weapon than any shout. She thought of the irony. He was threatening her with a district attorney, not knowing that she appointed and could remove every prosecutor in the state. It was like a man with a water pistol threatening to flood the ocean. The wait for Reeves to return felt endless. The only sound was the constant hum of the fluorescent lights. Nia used the moment to steady herself, to push past the pain and humiliation, and fully assume her role as Attorney General. She was no longer a victim. She was a judicial officer, a witness to a series of serious criminal and constitutional violations. Reeves returned carrying her briefcase and purse as if they were contaminated. He set them carefully on the table, making sure not to get too close to Nia. "All right, let's get this show started," Brennan said, returning to the table. "Go ahead. Prove you're the Queen of England." He pointed at her bag. Nia did not move. "You have me handcuffed, officer. I cannot retrieve my wallet myself." A flash of annoyance crossed Brennan's face. Clearly, he had not thought that through. With a frustrated sigh, he grabbed her purse, opened it, and dumped its contents carelessly onto the metal table. A wallet, a tube of lipstick, a phone. Keys and a small tin of mints slid across the surface. He took the wallet and yanked it open with his dirty thumb. He pulled out her driver's license and stared at it. The name was Naya Harlow. The address was a prestigious one in the state capital. The photo was unmistakably hers. He looked at the photo, then at her bruised face, then back at the photo. He pulled out a second card. It was gold embossed and bore the official state seal. It read, "Nia Harlow, State Attorney General, Department of Justice." He held the two cards between his thick fingers, knuckles white. The arrogance that had been etched on his face began to fade, replaced by a flicker of confusion, and then a growing, agonizing uncertainty. "These are good forgeries," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Really good." "They are not forgeries," Naya said in a low voice heavy with weight. "I believe I am entitled to my phone call now." Brennan's laugh was forced this time. "A phone call? Oh, I don't think so. You've been watching too much television, little girl. You don't get a call until you've been formally booked." "That is not true," Naya stated, letting her legal mind take control. "I have been detained for a considerable time. I have suffered physical assault. I have been denied the right to identify myself, and now I am being denied the right to counsel. With every step you take, officer, you dig yourself deeper. I suggest you give me my phone." Her tone was not a plea. It was a command from a woman accustomed to being obeyed. And for the first time, a glimmer of genuine fear penetrated the hard mind of Officer Brennan. Just as Brennan was about to retort with another vehement denial, the door to the interrogation room opened without a knock. A man in an impeccably tailored gray suit stood in the threshold, his expression reflecting contained fury. He was about 60, with gray hair and the unmistakable air of someone who did not tolerate stupidity. His eyes took in the scene at once, the contents of Nia's bag scattered, the identification documents in Brennan's hand, and Nia herself, seated, bruised, and handcuffed to a chair. The man's already somber face hardened into a mask of cold rage. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. His voice, a deep, threatening growl, commanded immediate attention. Officer Brennan, startled by the sudden intrusion, straightened. His training kicked in. "Sir, this is a restricted area. I'm a police officer. I know what I'm doing." The man cut him off, stepping fully into the room. His gaze locked on Nia. "Ms. Harlow, I'm Robert Langford, the governor's chief of staff. I was sent to escort you to your hotel. Forgive the delay. Your flight arrived a few minutes early." The color drained from Officer Brennan's face. It was a shocking, visible transformation. His ruddy complexion turned a sickly pale white. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked from the impeccable chief of staff to the handcuffed woman as his mind struggled to process the impossible reality collapsing around him. Reeves, the partner, looked as if he might be sick. He pressed himself against the wall as if wishing it would swallow him. Langford's attention shifted from Nia to the two officers, and he narrowed his eyes. "Someone is going to explain to me in simple words why the new state attorney general is handcuffed and bleeding from the lip." He took a step toward Brennan, who instinctively backed away. "You," Langford said, pointing at Brennan with a trembling finger. "What is your name and badge number?" Brennan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Officer Brennan, sir. Badge 714. Officer Brennan," Langford repeated, the name tasting like poison in his mouth. "You have approximately 10 seconds to take those handcuffs off the state attorney general before I personally call the governor and have you suspended without pay. Do I make myself clear?" The threat was no exaggeration. Brennan fumbled for the handcuff key on his belt. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely insert it into the lock. The first cuff opened with a click. He moved to the second with clumsy, panicked movements. The moment her hands were free, Nia brought them to the table in front of her and slowly, deliberately rubbed her bruised wrists. She did not look at Langford. She did not look at Reeves. She stared fixedly at the terrified man before her. The removal of the handcuffs was like flipping a switch. The balance of power in the room did not merely shift. It underwent a seismic, violent reversal. Langford was still speaking, his voice a torrent of contained fury. "I was at the gate. I saw how it ended. I saw you shove her. I have a dozen witnesses who saw you throw her to the ground. The entire airport has footage of you parading her through the terminal like a common criminal. What possible justification could you have?" Brennan, his bravado completely shattered, could only stammer. "Sir, we received a report. A woman matching her description, wanted for armed robbery. You thought the Attorney General was an armed robber?" Langford's voice dripped with incredulous contempt. "Did you ask for her identification?" "She wasn't cooperating, sir." Brennan lied weakly. "No." Nia's voice cut through his pathetic attempt at defense. It was a whisper, yet it silenced the room. "That is not what happened." She rose slowly, her body aching, but her posture radiated an authority more powerful than any uniform or badge. "And now, Officer Brennan, you and I are going to talk about what really happened." The interrogation room, which moments earlier had been Brennan's stage, was now Nia's courtroom. She stood, and despite her disheveled appearance, she seemed to grow in stature, overshadowing everyone present. The pain in her body was a dull, distant discomfort. The fire in her mind was sharp and focused. She was no longer the accused. She was the accuser, the judge, and the jury. She looked at Robert Langford. "Mr. Langford, thank you for being here. Please ensure that Officer Reeves remains in this room. He is a key witness." Her voice was devoid of emotion, a cold, precise instrument of the law. Langford, the governor's right hand, simply nodded. Of course, Attorney General. The title, spoken with such deference, was another nail in the coffin. She then turned her full attention to Brennan. The man who had scorned her, manhandled her, and humiliated her now visibly trembled. He could not meet her eyes. "Officer Brennan," she began in the same tone she used with a hostile witness on the stand. "Let us start at the beginning. You approached me as I was deplaning. On what grounds?" "Probable cause," he muttered, repeating the words like a talisman in the hope of saving himself. "Based on what concrete articulable facts?" she pressed. "We received a report. A passenger said you looked like the woman on a wanted poster. A passenger, not a federal agent, not a flight attendant. An anonymous passenger," she clarified. "Did you obtain this passenger's name? A statement?" "No, it was a quick call," he stammered. "So you acted on an anonymous tip without verification. Is that standard procedure?" She did not wait for an answer. "When you approached, I offered my identification. You refused. Is that also standard procedure?" "You were making sudden movements. I was adjusting my briefcase to reach my bag, a movement you interpreted as a threat. Why?" Her questions were relentless, each one exposing a flaw in his procedure, a bias in his judgment. She took a slow step toward him. He flinched. "You accused me of being wanted for armed robbery. Did you have an arrest warrant for me, officer?" "No." "Did you have a photo of the alleged suspect to compare with me?" "It was a description." "A description," Naya repeated, her voice heavy with contempt. "A black woman, tall and well-dressed, in a city of more than 2 million people. That was the basis for your assault." She used the word deliberately. Assault. The word hung in the air between them like an accusation. She pointed to her face with a steady hand. "This cut on my lip, this abrasion on my cheek, did I sustain them while resisting arrest?" Brennan was sweating profusely. The collar of his uniform suddenly felt tight. "The use of force was necessary to subdue a resisting suspect." "I was not resisting," Naya corrected him, her voice glacial. "I was standing still. You threw me to the ground after I informed you of my position. At that point, you were no longer acting on a mistaken belief. You were acting with malice. You were punishing me for challenging you." She turned her gaze to the silent, pale Officer Reeves. "Officer Reeves, you witnessed everything. Did you at any point see me act aggressively toward Officer Brennan? Did you see me resist his orders before he initiated physical contact?" Reeves swallowed hard, looking alternately at Naya and his partner. He was trapped. Lying now would make him an accomplice. No, ma'am," he whispered. "She was just standing there." The confession, though quiet, resonated like a cannon shot in the small room. Brennan looked at his partner with pure hatred, a feeling of betrayal. Nia turned back to Brennan, her face a mask of icy fury. "You put your hands on me. You handcuffed me. You paraded me through a public place. You detained me unlawfully. You denied me my right to counsel. And you did it all based on a vague description and your own prejudices." She took a final step, planting herself in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "You did not make a mistake, Officer Brennan. You made a decision. And you will be held accountable for every second of it. Your career as a police officer is over, and depending on what I decide to do next, your freedom may be over as well." The cold gray room rapidly became the nerve center of a rapidly intensifying crisis. Robert Langford, whose initial fury had transformed into a grim, efficient focus, was speaking on the phone in a low but firm voice. "I want the chief of airport police, not his deputy or his secretary. I want the chief, and I want every piece of surveillance footage from Gate C-12 and the main terminal secured immediately. No excuses." While Langford coordinated the high-level response, a team of airport paramedics arrived. They were professional and discreet. their faces reflecting shock as they gently cleaned the cut on Nia's lip and examined the swelling on her cheek. They documented every abrasion on her wrists from the handcuffs and the bruises already forming on her knees. One of the paramedics, a kind-eyed woman in her 40s, looked at Nia with deep compassion. "Ma'am, we need to take you to the hospital to be checked for a possible concussion and to have these injuries officially recorded." "Thank you." "All right," Nia said, her voice still tight. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving behind a sharp pain and extreme exhaustion, but her mind continued at full speed, planning the next steps. Just as the paramedics were helping her to her feet, another man arrived. It was Marcus Hale, an old friend, and one of the state's most brilliant civil rights attorneys. Nia had called him the moment Langford returned her phone. Marcus was a tall, impeccably dressed man, whose usual joviality vanished instantly upon seeing Nia's face. "Nia," he whispered, moving quickly to her. "My God, what have they done to you?" He embraced her tenderly, but his gaze hardened when it fell on Officer Brennan, who was now being formally detained in a corner of the room by two stern-faced senior officers who had appeared at the chief's request. "Don't say another word," Marcus told Nia quietly. "To anyone. Leave it to me." He went to work immediately, and his presence transformed the dynamics once more. He was not just a friend. He was her legal protector. He spoke with the paramedics, ensuring they understood the importance of their report. He conferred with Langford, confirming that the chain of custody for the video evidence was being established. He formally requested the names and badge numbers of Brennan and Reeves, along with copies of any preliminary incident reports Brennan might have begun drafting before his world collapsed. The airport police chief finally arrived, flushed and out of breath. It was as if a hurricane were forming directly over his department. "Ms. Harlow," he began, his voice tight with anxiety. "On behalf of my entire department, I offer my most sincere apologies. This is unacceptable." "Chief," Marcus interrupted sharply. "Your apologies are irrelevant right now. What matters is that your officer, acting in the course of his duties, assaulted my client. We will need his complete personnel file, including all previous complaints, sustained or not." The chief paled slightly, but nodded. "Of course, whatever you need." As the paramedics prepared to transfer Nia to a stretcher, a precaution she initially resisted, but which Marcus insisted upon for both legal and medical reasons. She locked eyes with Brennan one last time. The terror in his eyes was palpable. He was not simply a man who had lost his job. He was a man staring into a legal abyss. And the person he had thrown into that abyss was now the one holding the map. Lying on the stretcher as she was wheeled through the same hallways where she had been led in humiliation, Nia felt a strange sense of detachment. The physical pain was real. The humiliation was real. But her mind was already building the case. She could see the courtroom. She could hear the testimonies. She could feel the weight of the evidence, the medical report, the dozens of cell phone videos, the airport's own high-definition surveillance footage, the damning testimony of Officer Reeves, and the service record that would likely reveal a pattern of behavior. This was not only about what Brennan had done to her. It was about building a case so solid, so overwhelming, that it would become a landmark, a warning, a tool for change. The arsenal was being assembled piece by piece. Without question, the hospital room was a quiet, sterile sanctuary after the chaos of the airport. The doctors had been thorough, confirming a mild concussion, contusions, and soft tissue damage. They took meticulous photographs of her injuries. Each flash of the camera was another piece of evidence. Marcus sat in a chair beside her bed, with a notepad on his lap, while Robert Langford stood by the window, speaking in a low, urgent voice on the phone with the governor. The news had already spread. A source at the airport had leaked the incident to the press, and Nia's name was on every news channel. Her personal assault had become a statewide political crisis. When Langford finished his call, he turned to them with a serious expression. "The governor sends his deepest apologies and offers his full support. He wants Officer Brennan's badge by the end of the day." Marcus looked up from his notes. "His badge is not enough. Firing him is the minimum. This is a personnel matter. Nia was the victim of a crime. Several crimes." Nia shifted in the hospital bed. The cool sheets brushed her skin. She had remained silent, absorbing the whirlwind of recent events. Now she spoke, her voice hoarse but firm. "Marcus is right. This is not just about a corrupt officer who had a bad day. This is about a system that allowed that officer to feel so untouchable that he could assault a woman in broad daylight in front of hundreds of witnesses with no fear of consequences." She looked at Langford. "What is Brennan's record? Have you reviewed it yet?" "Yes," Langford said, his face shadowed. "It's not clean. 3 previous complaints for excessive force in recent years, all against people of color, and all dismissed by his department's internal review board for lack of foundation." The information landed in the room with a dull, unpleasant thud. It was the missing piece of the puzzle. This was not an anomaly. It was a pattern. Brennan was a predator who had been protected by the very system he was sworn to serve. "They protected him," Nia said quietly, a cold, piercing anger hardening in her chest. "He had done it before, and they let him get away with it, so he did it again. He simply chose the wrong target this time." That thought haunted her. What if she had not been the Attorney General? What if she had been a teacher, a nurse, a student? Right now, she would be in a cell facing an endless string of false charges. Her word against that of 2 officers. Her life could be ruined. And that had happened to at least 3 other people, perhaps more. "This is what we do," she declared, her voice growing steadier. She was no longer a patient. She was the Attorney General laying out her strategy. "We will file criminal charges against Brennan. Assault, battery, unlawful detention, false reporting if he filed any, and violation of federal civil rights. We will also charge Officer Reeves with failure to intervene. His silence makes him complicit," she continued with astonishing mental clarity. "But that is only the first step. That is about holding him accountable for the act. It is not reform. Robert, I want you to tell the governor that my first official action as State Attorney General will be to open a comprehensive investigation of the Airport Police Department. We are subpoenaing every officer who has been the subject of a complaint over previous years. We are reviewing their training protocols, their hiring practices, and most importantly, their internal affairs process. We are going to find out how a man like Brennan was allowed to wear a badge for so long. They will fight us," Langford warned. "The police union will call it a witch hunt." "Let them," Nia replied, her gaze blazing. "Let them defend a system that protects racist, violent officers. Let them make that argument to the public on television, while the images of my bruised face are still fresh. They saw a black woman and assumed she was a criminal. This ends now. This is not about revenge. I am no longer seeking revenge. This is about making certain this is the last time. This is about tearing down a corrupt system and rebuilding it from the ground up. Firing Brennan is a start, but changing the culture that created him, that is true justice." Sometime later, Nia Harlow stood in the office that was now hers. The spacious corner suite on the top floor of the Department of Justice building offered a panoramic view of the city. Its skyline was a testament to ambition and power. The office remained impersonal. The empty mahogany desk held nothing but a single sealed manila envelope. Her predecessor's belongings had been removed, leaving behind a blank canvas. It felt less like a workspace and more like a battlefield awaiting its general. She walked to the enormous window, her reflection superimposed on the city. The bruises on her face had begun to bloom into a tapestry of purple and yellow. They were a raw, visible reminder of her welcome. Every time she saw her reflection, she saw not only her own pain, but the faces of countless others whose wounds were never seen, whose stories were never heard. Her swearing-in ceremony had been postponed. In its place, she had held a press conference from the hospital, her voice steady and her gaze unwavering. She detailed her ordeal and announced the comprehensive investigation. The images of her, serene and eloquent, even in a hospital gown, had been striking. The image of the state's chief prosecutor as a victim of police brutality was a story so powerful it had unleashed a media storm. Officer Brennan had been fired and charged. His mugshot, the portrait of a defeated, bewildered man, now appeared alongside her injured face in every media outlet. Officer Reeves was on unpaid leave, cooperating with the investigation in a desperate attempt to gain clemency. The union was protesting vigorously, politicians were flexing their power, and the public was watching. Nia touched the cold glass of the window. She had imagined this moment for years, but never like this. She had thought she would feel triumphant, a sense of having arrived. Instead, she felt the immense, crushing weight of responsibility. Her trauma had become a tool, a catalyst. It had granted her a singular form of power forged in pain and humiliation. The question was how to use it. Her phone vibrated. It was Marcus. "Are you ready?" he asked. "The first round of subpoenas is ready to go out." "Send them," she said without hesitation. "And Marcus, I want the files on the 3 people who filed previous complaints against Brennan. I want to meet with them personally." She hung up and returned to the desk. She took the manila envelope that contained high-resolution, glossy photographs of her injuries taken at the hospital. The evidence. She pulled one out. Her own face stared back at her, swollen and disfigured. She did not flinch. That was her armor now. Not the silk blouse, but the scars. The proof. She had arrived in this city as Attorney General, believing in the system she was meant to lead. Now she saw its cracks, its corruption, with a clarity that only a victim can possess. She was no longer merely an administrator of justice. She was a warrior, forged and hardened by the very injustice she had sworn to fight. Her personal battle was over, but the war had only just begun. And as she gazed out over the sprawling city that was now under her responsibility, she made a silent promise. She would not let them forget. She would use her power, her pain, and her position to protect every other member of her community who did not have a title to shield them. This office would not be a throne of power, but a forge, and from it she would forge a new and better form of justice. The fight for accountability is often waged not in the noisy chaos of the event itself, but in the quiet, determined work that follows. It is fought in the impersonal offices where policies are rewritten, in the courtrooms where evidence is meticulously presented, and in the hearts of those who refuse to let injustice have the final word. Nia's story is a stark reminder that the systems designed to protect us can often be the source of our deepest wounds. But it is also proof that the determination of one person, especially when reinforced by a position of power, can trigger a response that transcends a single incident. Her struggle no longer centered on her own pain, but on honoring the pain of those who came before her and protecting future generations. She would carry her scars not as a mark of victimization, but as a credential, the ultimate qualification for the work she had been born to do. What part of Nia's response to the assault impacted you the most? Do you believe one person can truly change a corrupt system? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching.